How are you doing? So I can't believe I haven't already talked about bone. We're getting to the point in this series of histology videos where we're looking at the connective tissues in detail. I used to be a connective tissue biologist. I used to be a cartilage biologist. The cartilage researchers are very close to the bone researchers. So when I start talking about bone, well, it's risky. You'll know whether I manage to keep this down to a 20-minute video or whether it's an hour long. I'm aiming to look at bone under the microscope and cover the classical features, the really interesting stuff. And oh yeah, I've got quite a few sections of bone. I've whittled it down just to 2 slides, but oh, it looks unlike any other tissue. And I think bone is something we're very aware of, it's something that's very physical, and it's something, well, something we should talk about. Let's talk about the types of bone, the way bone gets classified first. So have a look at these x-rays. This is an x-ray of my foot, and well, spot the fractured bone. This was many years ago, healed great. But look at the bones, and you can see that on the outer edges of the bones, it looks really dense, because it looks really white. But in the center of the bones aren't solid white all the way through, are they? You can see through the bones, but what you can see there is you can see a trabecular network of spicules, if you like, trabeculae. There are little bony projections. Bone is a living tissue. In there is the bone marrow. This is filled with cells, filled with blood vessels, filled with the cells of the bone, and the outer part of the bone is what you're familiar with if you know, poke a bone, look at skeletons and stuff. But the bone, of course, has got to balance up its weight versus its strength. And the cells that manage the bone, they respond to stresses and strains. They measure the loads placed upon the bone and they react to this. See what I mean? There's a whole bunch of fun signaling going on in here, which means that bone is adaptable, bone can change. If you need your bones to be stronger and you train to make your bones stronger, your bones will get stronger. So we've got on the outside compact bone that also gets called cortical bone because it's in the outside, the cortex. Whereas in the inside of the bone, though, that scaffolding there, that's trabecular bone or spongy bone or cancellous bone. I know, 3 words for everything, but those are the words that you'll come across. So that trabecular bone will change depending upon the loads placed upon it. So that's the job the cells have got to do. We'll have a look at these sections and then we can talk about the cells, right? Okay, so I've got 2 sections. This one's a very special and slightly different one. This is a bit more of a bog standard one. Now, bone's a bit of a pain to look at under a light microscope. Well, not to look at, to prepare, but to prepare for. Imagine that bone is hard because it's mineralized. So if you're trying to cut sections that are 10 microns thick, you first have to demineralize your bone. If you demineralize your bone, it then gets softer and, you know, it's harder to cut sections. So we'll probably see that some of these bits have come apart. Okay, perfect. This is actually a skull bone. Now, there's the bone, and there is the bone marrow. And we're seeing lots of spaces because those cells they're adipocytes. So there's a lot of fat in here, and we're seeing lots of cells of the blood. Bone is really important, not because of weight bearing and movement, making these hard levers, but also because bone is a store of calcium and phosphate ions, and calcium is released into the blood because cells of the body need calcium to function, but also it's where bone marrow lives. And sure, we've got some fat stored in here, but in the bones of the body, these are where the progenitor cells of the blood reside. This is where new cells of the blood come from, red cells and white cells, as in erythrocytes and cells of the immune system. So it's incredibly important, and we can see then that there is the compact bone, the cortical bone. And we can see a little bit of structure here. It's got a pink stain. And then we can see these trabeculae, right? These spicules extending into the bone. And like I said, some of this stuff is moved around because when it's mineralized, it holds itself in place very, very well. But when we demineralize it and cut sections, well, the blade moves things around a bit. But I think you get the idea. So this is the trabecular bone. Spicules of bone, full of bone marrow. And out here, this is the compact bone, the cortical bone. Now we can see lots of dots in there, so I'm guessing this is a hematoxylin and niacin stain. So we've got a light pink stain for the extracellular matrix, and the nuclei are staining purple. So the bone marrow is staining purple because we've got lots of cells of the blood in there, which are largely, white cells are largely nuclei and not a lot of anything else. So we're seeing a lot of purple cells, whereas in the bone we're seeing some nuclei spread out. So those are the cells of the bone. Those are going to be the osteocytes. We're seeing a lot of pink. So most of bone is pink. Most of the bone is the extracellular matrix. So the cells within the bone are making the extracellular matrix and managing the extracellular matrix. And in there we've got type 1 collagen. We've got a whole lot of other bits and bobs, proteoglycans and glycosaminoglycans. And it's mineralized by calcium and phosphate minerals, and that's what makes bone hard. And on the outside, so that side there is the superficial surface of the bone, the outside of the bone. There we can see the periosteum. So there is a periosteal covering to bones, and there's two layers. There's a connective tissue covering, and then the layer closest to the bone, this is actually where we see some progenitor cells of the bone residing. And the other cells in there will be fibroblasts, your typical connective tissue cell. And here we get to the cells of the bone. Now, if we, I hope that wasn't too out of focus. It's difficult to get the camera focused on the low powers. So that was looking at this with a with a low power objective. That was 4 times objective lens, 10 times to my eye, 40 times. Now I'm looking at 10 times objective lens, 10 times to my eye, so 100 times magnification. Let's jump up again, so 200 times magnification to my eyes. Oh, it's a bit of a wrinkly section. Yeah, that's bone for you. So the magnification of this will vary depending upon the size of your screen, but you can see there towards the left, that's the periosteum. So a much lighter staining connective tissue, and the cells in that deeper layer there, some of those cells will be osteoprogenitors, so the stem cells of bone. Osteoprogenitors become osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are on the surface of bone and they make bone. Osteoblasts surround themselves with extracellular matrix and become within the bone, and then they are osteocytes. Now the other cell we'll see will be osteoclasts. Now so the cells we're seeing within the bone there, those are osteocytes, and you can see they're living in their own little spaces. And the bigger spaces will be blood vessels, because bone is highly vascularized and it's got lots of nerves in it and stuff. But those cells within the pink are osteocytes. Now, osteoprogenitors become osteoblasts, become osteocytes. But osteoclasts, oh, I hope we find some because they are cool. Osteoclasts don't come from the osteoprogenitors. They come from the cells of the bone marrow, the hematopoietic cells. They are they're like macrophages. They're from the macrophage line, right? But okay. Let's go there now. Right. So. On the surface, that's pretty good. It's a bit folded there, but okay. So periosteum covers the bone, and then we slide into the bone. You can actually see there's a bit of a layer there, a bit of a special layer up against the periosteum, and we'll see when we look at the other stain how there are particular layers there, kind of reinforcing the outermost part of the bone, and the periosteum is tied into that with collagen fibres. What are those called? Sharpie's fibres, I think. And then as we go in, we're seeing some larger spaces within the bone. Like I say, we get a sense that there are blood vessels in there. So this is all compact bone, cortical bone. Now as we slide further in, there's another surface there, right? And that is the deep edge of the compact bone. And then we're up against the bone marrow there. Now the bone marrow would have been right up against it. It's just been pulled apart with sectioning. And we'll see that this deep layer, this is where the spicules are coming from, where the trabeculae are coming from. And you can see that essentially we've kind of got the same arrangement going on in terms of osteocytes. Isn't that cool? So there's a trabecular. So again, inside there we've got osteocytes. Oh, now on the surface, yeah, I'm already seeing some cool stuff. Okay, so if the periosteum was the outside surface of the bone, the inside surfaces of the bone here are covered by endosteum, and it's a little bit different. Here we also find osteoprogenitor cells. Now those osteoprogenitor cells will become osteoblasts, which are going to lay down new bone. So we'll see osteoprogenitors and we'll see osteoblasts in the endosteum. Keep it up. Oh, there's a little dude there. Now some of these cells are very flat, right? So those are probably the progenitors, and then some of the cells are starting to get a bit taller, so those are going to be osteoblasts. If we look over here, again you can see, and you see how it's kind of, you know, it's not like an epithelium that's nice and neat and even all the way along. It changes as we go along the surface of the bone here. So we've got, oh, there's another one. Getting ahead of myself. So we see some very thin cells, probably the osteoprogenitors, and then we see some taller cells, probably laying down that spicule there. Funnily enough, oh, not quite on the other side, but let me jump into that. See that cell in the middle there? Does that look to you like there are two nuclei very close together, possibly even in the same cell? What do you think? That is an osteoclast. So an osteoclast has got, has this got a fixed, oh yeah, if I focus up and down, you can see there's another nucleus in there. So an osteoclast is a multi-nuclear cell, like I say. So these are multiple cells that have come together to form a single cell. And do you see how it's sat in its little depression there? So the job of the osteoclast is to erode bone. So the osteoclast can remove bone so that you have less bone, so it's less strong, so it's lighter. But also osteoclasts can remove bone to release calcium into the blood. So osteoclasts are affected by parathyroid hormone and calcitonin indirectly. But so while osteoblasts make bone, osteoclasts remove bone. So bone is constantly being remodeled. This is very much a living tissue. Look at that one there. I mean, that is 4 nuclei smushed together, and they're living within the same cell membrane, right? There's no division between those cells. That's another osteoclast. And you can just see the scoop taken out of the surface where it is eroding the bone. So that's a lacuna. That lacuna is digging for itself is called a Hauschip's lacuna. I think people still use that term. Oh, there's a good one as well. Look, see. Ooh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nuclei mushed together again. Again, you can see the Hauschip's lacuna that it's digging for itself. And then here we've got some taller cells. So here we've got osteoblasts on the surface, and they're laying down bone on this spicule, this trabeculum. Oh, we're up against the edge of the cut edge of the section there. Okay, so I think that's pretty cool. I haven't talked much about the osteocytes yet because we can see them better on another section. Let's just have one more look. So If we go into the, if we go, oh, okay, yeah. So if we go into the compact bone again, here we are looking at lots of osteocytes. So these osteocytes have surrounded themselves with bone, they're maintaining this bone, and they're also within a lacuna. Now, you can just about get the sense of a circle there. So we're arranged into circles, and this is the Haversian system, this is the Osteon. But with this staining, we can't see too much. We can see those cells are roughly arranged into that sort of a ring, but there's more to the story. Right, so imagine that circle, and then we'll swap to this section. Now this is a pretty special section. So what you can do with bone I've gone out to my lowest power, but we're looking at compact bone again. What you can do with bone is when it's mineralized still, and it's still hard bone, you can cut sections and then grind it to get it as thin as you dare and put it on a microscope slide. So this microscope slide's actually got a bit of a stacker on it. This is going to be a thick section relative to light microscopy. And then I'm guessing it's usually India ink that you use. And can you see those circles again? That's the Osteon, that's the Haversian system that we're looking at. And now we can see the osteocytes within their lacunae, but we can see the osteocytes sending out processes, cytoplasmic processes. So they're not sat there within that lacuna, they're sending these processes out, and they're connected to each other, and they're communicating with one another. Doesn't this look amazing? Right, let's jump up to 200 times magnification. It's probably going to be the sweet spot. Yeah, you can see I can focus up and down quite a way, so it's a thick-ish section. Now, the osteon is a cylinder, and that cylinder is usually running the length of the long bone, right? In the centre there is the Haversian canal, or the central canal, and in that canal are blood vessels. I think we can probably maybe see that there, but this is fine. So in there we've got blood vessels. Bone is highly vascularized. There is a lot of blood in bone. So we've got a little artery, a little vein, probably going to be a nerve in there, maybe lymphatics. Because bone has also got a great nerve supply, which is why when you fracture a bone, it's really painful. And that pain stops you moving and lets the bone repair itself. And you can see, I think, how those osteocytes are arranged in rings, so concentric circles, rings around that central canal. And that's the lamellar system that gets compact bone. This is a feature of lamellar bone. So that's what we mean by lamellae, are those concentric rings, those concentric layers. And you can see those tiny little processes. Those are cytoplasmic processes of the osteocytes extending in to touch the next osteocyte and the next osteocyte, and then extending in to that central canal. And they can exchange molecules for communication, or for general cellular function and nutrition and that sort of thing. So you can also see how these cells are they're never very far away from a blood vessel. This is completely the opposite of cartilage. We'll look at cartilage in the future. Cartilage has very little blood supply, very little nerve supply, and does different jobs. Oh man, look at that, isn't that cool? Can you see like the outer ring of like where the osteon ends? That would be called the cement line. I think there's quite a good cement line on that one. Now the other feature, so if you imagine you've got all these osteons running as cylinders up the bone, and you've got blood vessels running within that central canal up the bone, those blood vessels connect occasionally. That's what we're seeing there. So you've got your blood vessels doing that, and occasionally there's another channel in the bone, because you need channels in the bone to let the blood vessels run. So this is running pretty much perpendicular to that. That's a Volkmann's canal or a perforating canal. We can see that there. We can see how that's going to that central canal and the blood vessels there. So in that perforating canal or Volkmann's canal, there will be blood vessels. Again, can we see? Oh, well, that's also a pretty good one there. Got the central canal, nothing in it in this because it's probably fallen out with sectioning, and the Volkmann's canal there. There's another one there. Does that make sense? That shape idea? Central canals, perforating canals are running perpendicular and connecting all of those. And in doing that, then you've got blood flowing through the bone. Now I think, yeah, so like I said, there are some layers around the outermost edges of the bone, which are kind of not osteons, they're other layers. But we're not going to see that here because this is just a cut chunk of bone. We're not seeing the true edge, are we? But let's find a tidy one. That tidy one? It's a pretty tidy one. Yeah, as you can see, compact bone is very compact, and it's all osteons up against osteons. This is the structural unit of compact bone, and I know that you think that this is probably the most amazing bit of histology you've seen yet, but just you wait. My PhD was on endochondral ossification, which is the formation of bone from cartilage. Wait until we get to endochondral ossification. I'm sure that video won't be an hour long, but that's it for bone. That is the stuff that we need to know, right? So we've talked about how we've got compact bone around the outside, and we've got trabecular bone or spongy bone in the inside. We talked about how bone is very much a living tissue filled with cells, and how those cells can respond to load to make more bone or to erode bone. We know that bone is a store of calcium and phosphate and what have you, and that those osteoclasts can remove that and put calcium back into the blood. We've seen how bone marrow is in the center of the bone, in between all the trabeculae. We've talked about the cells of bone. We've talked about osteoprogenitors becoming osteoblasts that make bone, surround themselves with bone and become osteocytes. And we've talked about osteoclasts, which come from the hematopoietic stem cells, the stem cells of the blood, and they erode the bone and manage the bone. And we talked about the osteon, how osteocytes have arranged themselves in compact bone around a central canal that has blood vessels. They've arranged themselves in circular layers, and they all connect to each other through those, probably didn't use the word canaliculi. So they're sending those cytoplasmic processes through canaliculi, tiny canals, to connect with one another, and ultimately with that central blood supply in the central canal. I hope you enjoy. You might enjoy bone as much as me, I don't know, but that's the histology of bone. That's the stuff you should know about. That's the really useful stuff. Hopefully I've covered all the terms in a useful way that you'll recognise them when they come up in your learning or your studies or your research or whatever. All right, bone. More connected tissues to come. See you next week.